8 years. That's how long I spent building a future with the man I thought I would marry. We shared holidays, family dinners, vacations, and countless promises about the life we'd someday have together. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, he posted a photo that changed everything. A wedding announcement. My heart raced as I opened it, expecting excitement, maybe even a proposal I'd somehow missed. Instead, I saw him standing beside another woman in a white dress. Minutes later, a message appeared on my phone. "Don't contact me again." I replied with one word. "Okay." By sunrise, everything changed. For 8 years, I believed I knew exactly how my future would look. Ethan and I met during our final year of college. What started as a friendship became a relationship that survived job changes, family challenges, long work hours, and every ordinary struggle life could throw at us. We celebrated birthdays together, spent holidays with each other's families, and talked endlessly about the home we would someday buy. Everyone around us assumed marriage was only a matter of time. Honestly, so did I. Whenever relatives asked when the wedding would happen, Ethan would smile and say, "Soon." When friends got engaged, he'd joke that we were taking the scenic route. I never pressured him. I trusted him. 8 years isn't something you invest lightly. 8 years creates certainty. Or, at least I thought it did. On a Tuesday morning, everything changed. I was sitting at my kitchen table before work, drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone when a social media notification appeared. Ethan had posted a new photo. I smiled automatically. He rarely posted anything. Then I opened it. The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. There was Ethan standing beneath a floral arch, dressed in a tailored suit. Beside him stood a woman in a white dress, holding his arm and smiling directly at the camera. Above the photo was a caption. "Excited to start this new chapter. Wedding this weekend." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. I read the caption again. Then again. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was a business event. Maybe I was misunderstanding something obvious. But deep down, I already knew the truth. My phone exploded with messages. Friends were asking questions. Some thought I already knew. Others assumed the account had been hacked. I stared at the screen as panic spread through my chest. Then a message from Ethan appeared. My hands trembled as I opened it. 3 short words changed everything. "Don't contact me again." The room went silent. After 8 years together, that was all he had to say. I stared at the message for nearly a minute before typing a single word. "Okay." I didn't cry after sending that one-word reply. At least, not right away. For the next several hours, I sat on my couch staring at the wall while my phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, cousins, former coworkers, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly reaching out. Most of them were asking the same question. What happened? I wished I knew. The strangest part wasn't the wedding announcement. It wasn't even the cold message telling me never to contact him again. It was the complete lack of warning. Just 2 weeks earlier, Ethan and I had dinner together at our favorite restaurant. 3 weeks earlier, we'd attended his nephew's birthday party. A month earlier, he'd helped my father install a new fence in the backyard. Nothing had seemed unusual. Yet as I replayed the previous few months in my head, small details started resurfacing. Moments I had ignored. Excuses I had accepted. Late-night meetings that became increasingly common. Weekend trips he claimed were work-related. Phone calls he always took outside. At the time, none of it felt suspicious. After 8 years together, trust becomes automatic. You stop questioning every detail because you believe you know the person beside you. Now I wasn't so sure. Around noon, my best friend Rachel arrived at my apartment carrying coffee and enough concern for both of us. She sat beside me quietly before speaking. "There's something you should know." My stomach tightened. Rachel hesitated. Then she admitted that several mutual friends had noticed Ethan acting differently for months. "He stopped bringing you up," she said carefully. "Whenever people asked about you, he'd change the subject." That hurt more than I expected, because it wasn't just a betrayal. It meant he had already started removing me from his life long before I knew anything was wrong. Rachel continued. Apparently Ethan had become unusually private. He avoided questions, skipped gatherings, made excuses whenever conversations turned personal. The more she talked, the more pieces began falling into place. By evening, I understood one thing clearly. The wedding announcement hadn't been a sudden decision. It had only been sudden for me. And for the first time, I stopped waiting for an explanation and started looking for the truth instead. That night, sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photo again. Ethan standing beside another woman, smiling, looking completely comfortable in a future that apparently didn't include me. By morning, exhaustion had replaced shock. I stopped asking why and started asking when. When had this really begun? I opened old messages, emails, and photos. Not because I wanted to torture myself, but because I needed answers. If 8 years could end with a single text message, then something important had happened long before that wedding announcement. At first, everything looked normal. Vacation pictures, birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, hundreds of conversations about ordinary life. Then I started noticing small contradictions. 6 months earlier, Ethan had canceled a weekend trip we'd planned for our anniversary. He claimed a major client needed his attention. Yet on that same weekend, there were no work emails, no business updates, nothing. 3 months earlier, he'd missed my cousin's engagement party because of an emergency meeting. Looking back, that excuse suddenly felt suspicious. The deeper I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. Around lunchtime, my cousin Megan called. "I didn't want to tell you this before," she said carefully. "I thought maybe you already knew." "Knew what?" There was a long pause. "People have been talking about his wedding for months." The words hit me harder than the announcement itself. Months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. Megan explained that several people had heard rumors earlier in the year. Some assumed Ethan and I had quietly broken up. Others believed I was helping plan the wedding. No one imagined I was completely unaware. After ending the call, I sat in silence. For the first time, I realized how many people had known pieces of the story before I did. Not the entire truth, but enough. Enough to understand that while I had been planning a future with Ethan, he had already been building another one. The realization was painful, yet strangely, it also brought clarity. The relationship I thought I'd lost wasn't the relationship I actually had. That version had already disappeared long ago. I was only now discovering the truth. Over the next few days, information kept finding me. I wasn't searching social media anymore. I wasn't calling people or asking questions. Somehow, the truth seemed determined to arrive on its own. Every conversation revealed another piece. Every piece made the picture worse. One evening, Rachel called again. "You need to prepare yourself," she warned. "For what?" "For how long this has probably been going on." My stomach sank. She explained that one of her coworkers had attended a networking event nearly a year earlier. Ethan had been there with the same woman from the wedding announcement. At the time, they appeared unusually close. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to make people wonder. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window. A year. Maybe longer. The thought hurt, but it also answered questions I had been avoiding. The canceled plans. The growing distance. The conversations that became shorter and less frequent. The future discussions that slowly disappeared. I had blamed stress, work, life. Anything except the obvious. The next morning, another surprise arrived. An acquaintance sent me screenshots from a wedding website. I almost didn't open them. When I finally did, my chest tightened. The wedding wasn't thrown together quickly. The venue had been reserved months earlier. Guest arrangements were detailed. Travel recommendations had been posted. Everything suggested a carefully planned celebration. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a project, a long-term plan, a secret life unfolding while I remained completely unaware. For a few minutes, anger finally appeared. Not explosive anger. Something colder. The realization that I had been denied the truth while everyone else enjoyed pieces of it. Yet even then, I resisted the urge to react publicly. No emotional posts. No accusations. No dramatic messages. Instead, I opened a notebook and started writing down everything I knew. Dates. events, conversations,
Patterns.
the more organized the facts became, the calmer I felt. For the first time since the wedding announcement, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking. And somewhere between heartbreak and clarity, I made a decision. Emotion had gotten me nowhere. From now on, patience would be my greatest advantage. The morning after everything finally settled in, I woke up expecting the same crushing feeling that had followed me all week. Instead, something felt different. The pain was still there. The betrayal was still real. But the shock had begun to fade. For the first time since seeing the wedding announcement, I wasn't waiting for Ethan to explain himself. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes. I wasn't imagining conversations that would never happen. I was simply tired of giving him control over my thoughts. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and looked out at the street below. Life was continuing. People were heading to work. Cars filled the roads. The world hadn't stopped because my relationship had ended. Strangely, that realization helped. Around mid-morning, my phone started buzzing again. Friends wanted updates. Some expected tears. Others expected anger. A few were practically waiting for a dramatic confrontation. When Rachel called, her first question made me laugh. Have you driven to the wedding venue yet?
No.
Have you sent a message?
No.
Posted anything online? Also no. She paused. You're handling this better than I expected. The truth was, I wasn't handling it perfectly. I still felt hurt. I still had questions. But I was beginning to understand something important. Nothing I said now would change what Ethan had chosen. That chapter was already over. After lunch, I pulled out a notebook and made a list. Not of regrets. Not of mistakes. A list of things I had postponed during the relationship. Places I wanted to visit. Professional certifications I never completed. Projects I'd talked about for years but never started. The list surprised me. Somewhere along the way, my future had become completely tied to another person's plans. Now those plans were gone, which meant I could build new ones. That afternoon, an email arrived from a company I'd interviewed with months earlier. At the time, I hadn't pursued the opportunity seriously because Ethan and I were discussing a possible move. Now, there was no move. No shared future. Only choices. As I reread the email, a small feeling appeared beneath the sadness.
Hope.
For the first time since everything collapsed, I realized my story wasn't ending. It was changing direction. And maybe that change would become the best thing that ever happened to me. The following weeks became a turning point. Not because the pain disappeared. It didn't. Some mornings I still woke up thinking about everything that had happened. Certain songs reminded me of Ethan. Certain restaurants brought back memories I wasn't ready to revisit. But instead of staying stuck, I started moving. The email from the company led to another interview. Then another. Within a month, I accepted a position with a growing consulting firm that offered better pay, more flexibility, and opportunities one had been putting off for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt excited about my future. The work was challenging. The team was supportive. Most importantly, every achievement belonged entirely to me. There were no compromises. No waiting for someone else's plans. No putting my goals on hold. Rachel noticed the difference immediately. One evening, we met for dinner after work. You seem lighter, she said. Lighter?
Yeah.
Not happy exactly, but stronger. I thought about that for a moment. She was right. I wasn't happy about losing an 8-year relationship, but I was beginning to trust myself again. That mattered. As the weeks passed, I signed up for a professional certification program I'd postponed twice before. I started exercising regularly. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly, my life became bigger than the heartbreak. Meanwhile, occasional updates about Ethan still surfaced through mutual contacts. I never asked for them. People simply talked. The wedding photos continued appearing online. The smiling couple looked perfect, at least on the surface. Yet the stories behind those photos weren't nearly as perfect. Someone mentioned tension between families during the wedding weekend. Another person described awkward conversations among guests. Nothing dramatic. Nothing scandalous. just enough to suggest that real life had already started replacing the fantasy. For the first time, I felt no jealousy, no desire to compare my life to theirs. I had spent weeks imagining that Ethan had won, and I had lost. Now that idea seemed ridiculous. Life wasn't a competition. It was a collection of choices. And every day, I was making better choices than the ones that had kept me trapped before. As summer approached, I realized something unexpected. The future no longer scared me. In fact, for the first time in years, it actually excited me. As summer turned into fall, I became increasingly busy building my new life. Work was going well. My certification program was ahead of schedule. Weekends were no longer spent waiting for someone else's availability. I traveled when I wanted, saw friends when I wanted, and made decisions without wondering how they would fit into another person's plans. Then, gradually, rumors about Ethan's marriage began reaching me. I never searched for updates. I never checked his social media. But mutual acquaintances still existed, and people have a way of sharing information whether you ask for it or not. One afternoon, Rachel called while I was leaving work. "You remember Jenna from Ethan's cousin's wedding?" "Vaguely." "Well, she ran into me today." I already knew where the conversation was heading. Rachel hesitated before continuing. "Apparently things aren't as perfect as they look online." I wasn't surprised. Social media had always been Ethan's specialty. He knew how to create an image, how to present a story, how to make everything appear effortless. Reality was usually more complicated. Over the next few weeks, similar comments surfaced. Nothing dramatic. No scandals. No shocking revelations. Just small observations. Guests from the wedding mentioned visible tension between the newlyweds. Friends noticed fewer public appearances together. Several people commented that the excitement surrounding the wedding seemed to disappear unusually fast. I listened politely whenever these conversations happened. Then, I changed the subject. The truth was, I didn't need updates anymore. Whatever happened in Ethan's marriage was now his responsibility. For years, I had measured my happiness against the success of our relationship. Now I was learning to measure it differently. One Friday afternoon, my company announced a major project. To my surprise, I was selected to lead part of the initiative. The promotion wasn't enormous, but it represented something important. Progress.
Growth.
Proof that I was moving forward. That evening, I celebrated with friends at a rooftop restaurant downtown. As the city lights reflected across the river, I found myself smiling without forcing it. A few months earlier, I couldn't imagine feeling normal again. Now I wasn't just feeling normal. I was genuinely happy. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized something else. The story I'd spent years trying to build with Ethan was over. But the story I was building for myself was becoming far more interesting. 3 months after the wedding announcement, something happened that would have felt impossible at the beginning of the year. I stopped thinking about Ethan every day. The realization came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing reports at work. Hours passed before I noticed I hadn't thought about him once. Not his wedding. Not the betrayal. Not the unanswered questions. Nothing. For a moment, I just sat there smiling. Healing wasn't dramatic after all. It happened quietly, one ordinary day at a time. That same month, the consulting project I'd been leading exceeded every expectation. The client was thrilled with the results, senior management praised our team, and during a company meeting, my director publicly recognized my work. The applause lasted only a few seconds. But for me, it meant everything. A year earlier, I would have rushed home to tell Ethan. Now I celebrated with people who were actually present in my life. The success created new opportunities. I was invited to industry events, asked to mentor newer employees, and included in conversations that once felt far beyond my reach. The confidence I had lost during the breakup was returning faster than I expected. One evening, while updating my professional profile online, I received a notification, a message request. At first, I assumed it was work-related. Then I saw the name. My stomach tightened. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds without opening it. It was the first direct contact since the wedding announcement. The first message since "Don't contact me again." Part of me felt curious. Another part felt annoyed. Mostly, I felt surprised. Why now? The timing didn't make sense. Months had passed. He had made his choice. He had gotten married. What could he possibly want? I closed the app without reading the message. For the rest of the evening, I ignored it completely. Instead, I met Rachel for dinner and told her what happened. Her eyes widened immediately. You're kidding.
No.
Did you read it? I shook my head. Rachel leaned back in her chair. That has to be killing him. I laughed. Maybe. Maybe not. For once, I wasn't interested in guessing what Ethan was thinking. The old version of me would have opened the message immediately. The new version could wait. And as I walked home that night, I realized something important. Whatever was inside that message, it no longer had the power to define my happiness. I finally opened Ethan's message 3 days later. Not because curiosity won. Because curiosity had already faded. I was sitting in a coffee shop after work when I remembered the unread notification. Between meetings, deadlines, and everything else happening in my life, I had almost forgotten it existed. That realization alone felt strange. There was a time when a message from Ethan could completely change my day. Now it was simply another notification. I opened the conversation. His message was surprisingly short. Can we talk? That was it. No explanation. No apology. No acknowledgement of how things had ended. Just 3 words. I stared at the screen for a moment before locking my phone again. Months earlier, I would have given anything for conversation. Now, I wasn't sure I wanted one. Later that evening, Rachel called. So, she asked immediately. You were right. He messaged me. What did he say? Can we talk? There was a brief silence. Then she laughed. That's all. That's all. Rachel sounded genuinely offended on my behalf. He disappears after 8 years, announces a wedding, tells you not to contact him, and now suddenly wants to talk? When she said it out loud, the situation sounded even more ridiculous. Still, something about the message bothered me. Not because I missed him, because it felt incomplete. People usually reach out for a reason. Regret.
Guilt.
Loneliness. Closure.
Something.
Yet Ethan had offered nothing. The next few days brought more clues. Through mutual friends, I learned he had been asking questions about me. How I was doing. Whether I was dating anyone. How work was going. The information didn't make me happy. It made me suspicious. Why would someone who had worked so hard to remove me from his life suddenly become interested again? The answer felt obvious. Something had changed. Maybe not overnight. Maybe not dramatically. But enough to make him reach for a door he had personally closed. A week after his first message, another one arrived. This time it was longer. I know I don't deserve a response, but there are things you should know. I read it twice. Then I set my phone aside. For the first time since all of this began, Ethan wanted answers from me. The difference was that now I wasn't in any hurry to give them. 2 days after Ethan's second message, I finally replied. Not with an answer. With a question. What is it that I should know? His response arrived less than 5 minutes later. Can we meet in person? I stared at the screen. Months ago, I would have agreed immediately. Now I considered ignoring him altogether. But eventually curiosity won. Not because I wanted him back. Because I wanted the truth. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown on Saturday morning. When I arrived, Ethan was already there. For a moment, I barely recognized him. He looked older. Tired. Not physically exhausted exactly. More like someone carrying a weight he couldn't put down. When he saw me, he stood awkwardly. Thank you for coming. I nodded and sat across from him. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he looked down at his coffee. My marriage isn't going well. There it was. The reason. Not an apology. Not accountability. A problem. I waited. Ethan explained that things had started falling apart shortly after the wedding. The excitement disappeared. Arguments became frequent. Expectations didn't match reality. The relationship he had been so certain about suddenly felt very different. As he talked, I noticed something surprising. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I just felt detached. Months earlier, hearing this would have felt like justice. Now it felt like consequences. Nothing more. Then Ethan said something that finally caught my attention. I made a mistake.
I almost laughed.
A mistake was forgetting an anniversary. A mistake was taking the wrong highway exit. What happened between us wasn't a mistake. It was a series of choices. Thousands of them. Day after day. For months. Maybe years. I didn't argue. I didn't interrupt. I simply listened. The more Ethan talked, the clearer everything became. The perfect future he'd imagined hadn't materialized. The fantasy had collided with reality. And reality was winning.
Eventually, he looked at me.
I never expected things to end up like this. For the first time, I answered honestly. I believe you. Because I did. Very few people expect the consequences of their decisions to arrive exactly as they do. The conversation continued for another hour. By the end, I finally understood why he had reached out. Not because he wanted to help me heal. Not because he wanted to tell the truth. Because his own story had stopped making sense. And somehow he thought I could help him understand it. After meeting Ethan, I expected to feel something dramatic. Relief. Anger. Vindication. Instead, I felt strangely calm. The conversation stayed in my mind for a few days, but not for the reasons I would have expected months earlier. What stood out wasn't what he said. It was how different my life had become. For years, I had measured success through the lens of our relationship. If we were doing well, I felt secure. If we struggled, I felt uncertain. So much of my identity had quietly become connected to being part of a couple. Now that connection was gone. And somehow I was stronger because of it. A week after our meeting, I attended an industry conference for work. A year earlier, I would have felt intimidated walking into a room filled with executives, consultants, and business leaders. This time was different. I belonged there. Not because someone invited me, because I had earned my place. During one networking session, I met several people who shared similar career interests. The conversations were easy, genuine, and surprisingly enjoyable. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't introducing myself as someone's partner. I was simply myself. That realization stayed with me. Around the same time, Rachel convinced me to join a weekend hiking group. At first, I resisted. The idea sounded exhausting. But eventually I agreed. To my surprise, I loved it. The fresh air, the conversations, the laughter. It all reminded me that life was much larger than the heartbreak I had once believed would define me forever. One Saturday morning, while walking a trail overlooking a lake, I found myself laughing so hard at a friend's story that tears filled my eyes. Real laughter. The kind that comes without effort, without pretending, without carrying the weight of the past. That was the moment I knew I was healing. Not because I had forgotten Ethan. Not because everything was perfect. Because my happiness no longer depended on what he did or didn't do. The lessons from those 8 years remained with me. Some painful. Some valuable. All important. They had taught me boundaries, self-respect, and the difference between loving someone and losing yourself for them. As I drove home from that hike, windows down and music playing, I realized something unexpected. The life I was building now wasn't a backup plan. It was becoming the life I should have been living all along. 3 weeks passed after my conversation with Ethan. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Work kept me busy. The hiking group became a regular part of my weekends. For the first time in years, my schedule reflected what I wanted instead of what fit someone else's plans. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, I saw Ethan again. Completely by accident. I was leaving a bookstore downtown with a novel tucked under my arm when I noticed someone standing near the entrance. At first, I almost walked past him. Then he turned. Our eyes met. For a brief second, both of us froze. Neither had expected this. "Hi," he said awkwardly. "Hi." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. Just unfamiliar. We had once known everything about each other. Now we felt like strangers. He looked different than he had at the cafe. Not dramatically. Just less certain. As if life had stopped following the script he expected. After a moment, he glanced toward the bookstore. "You still buy too many books." I laughed despite myself. "And you still notice things nobody else does." For the first time, the conversation felt natural. Not emotional. Not painful. Just two people talking. We stood beneath the awning while rain tapped softly against the sidewalk. Eventually, Ethan sighed. I don't think I realized how much damage I caused. The words hung between us. Months earlier, hearing them would have meant everything. Now they felt strangely distant. Not because they weren't sincere, because I no longer needed them. I know, I said. He nodded slowly. There was no defense. No excuse. No attempt to rewrite history. Just acceptance. For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work. The city. Mutual friends. Nothing important. Yet somehow the contrast became impossible to ignore. When we were together, my world had gradually become smaller. Now it felt bigger, brighter, full of possibilities. Eventually the rain slowed. People began moving through the streets again. Ethan looked at me carefully. You seem happy. I thought about the question. Not the version of happiness I once imagined. Not the life I spent years planning. Something better. Something real. I am happy, I said. And for the first time, I realized how true those words were. Ethan smiled sadly. Then he nodded. As we walked in opposite directions, I felt no anger, no regret, no desire for revenge. Just gratitude that I had survived the worst chapter of my life and discovered a better one waiting on the other side. A month after our unexpected meeting outside the bookstore, I received another message from Ethan. This time I almost ignored it. Not out of anger. Simply because my life no longer revolved around wondering what he wanted. Still, curiosity eventually got the better of me. The message was longer than the others. For the first time, it wasn't asking for a meeting. It wasn't asking to talk. It was an apology. A real one. At least, as real as an apology could be after everything that had happened. He admitted he had handled our breakup terribly. He admitted he had chosen the easiest path for himself instead of the honest one. He admitted that he should have told me the truth long before the wedding announcement. There were no excuses. No attempts to blame circumstances. No claims that things just happened. Only responsibility. I read the message twice. Then I put my phone down and went for a walk. The evening air was cool. The city lights reflected against the river. And for the first time, I allowed myself to look backward without feeling trapped there. 8 years. That was a long time. A significant part of my life. For a while, I viewed those years as wasted. A painful investment that produced nothing but heartbreak. Now I saw them differently. Those years had shaped me. They taught me patience, commitment, resilience. They also taught me what I would never accept again. The relationship ended badly, but the lessons remained valuable. When I returned home, Ethan's message was still open on my screen. Waiting. Not demanding. Just waiting. I realized something then. The decision in front of me wasn't about him. It was about me. Did I need to forgive him? Did I need to continue the conversation? Did I need anything from him at all? The answer surprised me. No. I didn't need closure anymore. I already had it. Closure hadn't arrived through apologies. It arrived through growth, through rebuilding, through discovering that my future was bigger than my past. After several minutes, I finally typed a response. It was short, honest, and enough. Thank you for the apology. I genuinely wish you well. Nothing more. Nothing less. I pressed send and set my phone aside. For years, I had imagined some dramatic ending to our story. A final confrontation. A perfect speech. A moment of justice. Instead, closure arrived quietly. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. The weeks that followed felt different. Not because something extraordinary happened. Because nothing extraordinary needed to happen anymore. For so long, my life had been defined by a single question. Why? Why had Ethan done it? Why hadn't I seen it sooner? Why had 8 years ended the way they did? Now those questions no longer mattered. One Saturday morning, I was sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the city slowly wake up. The air was cool, the streets were quiet, and for the first time in a very long while, my mind felt peaceful. Not distracted. Not occupied. peaceful. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The wedding announcement, the heartbreak, the confusion, the long nights spent replaying old memories, the difficult process of rebuilding my confidence. At the time, each step felt overwhelming. Looking back, it felt like a journey, a difficult one, but still a journey worth taking, because every painful moment had pushed me toward the person I was becoming. A stronger person, a wiser person, a person who understood her own value. That afternoon, Rachel and I met for lunch. As usual, she asked how I was doing. I smiled. Honestly, really good. She laughed. You know, a year ago I never thought I'd hear you say that. Neither did I. Yet here I was. Not surviving. Thriving. The difference mattered. After lunch, we walked through a nearby park filled with families, joggers, and people enjoying the sunshine. At one point, Rachel stopped and looked at me. Do you ever miss him? It was a fair question. I considered it carefully. I miss who I thought he was, I admitted, not who he actually became. Rachel nodded. She understood immediately. And so did I. The truth was, letting go wasn't a single decision. It was a process. 100 small choices made every day. Choosing not to dwell on the past.
Choosing not to compare.
Choosing not to carry resentment. Eventually those choices became habits. Then they became freedom. As the sun began setting, I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The future no longer looked uncertain. It looked open, full of possibilities I couldn't yet see. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was excited to discover it. If someone had asked me a year earlier what the turning point would be, I would have pointed to the wedding announcement. The photo, the betrayal, the message that ended 8 years with 4 cold words. But I would have been wrong. The real turning point wasn't the day Ethan announced his wedding. It was the day after. The day I replied with one word. Okay. At the time, that response felt insignificant. I wasn't making a statement. I wasn't trying to be strong. I simply didn't have the energy to argue. Yet looking back, that single moment changed everything. Because when I chose not to chase him, I unknowingly chose myself. I chose dignity over desperation, peace over chaos, reality over false hope. The truth is, silence accomplished something anger never could. It gave me space.
Space to think.
Space to heal. Space to see my life clearly. Had I spent months fighting for explanations, I might never have noticed the opportunities waiting in front of me. The new career, the friendships I strengthened, the experiences I almost missed, the confidence I rebuilt from the ground up. None of those things arrived overnight. They arrived because I kept moving forward one day at a time.
Slowly.
Imperfectly.
Consistently.
And somewhere along the way, something remarkable happened. The worst event of my life stopped being the center of my story. It became a chapter. An important chapter. But only one chapter. The greatest surprise wasn't that Ethan eventually reached out. It wasn't that his marriage struggled. It wasn't even the apology. The greatest surprise was discovering that happiness returned without asking permission. It appeared in ordinary moments. A successful project. A dinner with friends. A weekend hike. A quiet morning coffee. Small moments that slowly built a life I genuinely loved. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see then. The future I lost was never guaranteed to make me happy. The future I built for myself did. That's the difference. 3 years from now, I probably won't remember every detail of Ethan's wedding announcement. I won't remember every rumor, every message, or every painful conversation. But I will remember what I learned. That self-respect matters. That healing takes time. That endings often disguise themselves as disasters before revealing themselves as opportunities. This morning, as sunlight fills my apartment and my phone buzzes with a message from people who truly care about me, I smile. Not because everything happened for a reason, because I found reasons to keep going despite what happened. 8 years taught me how to love someone else. What came afterward taught me how to love myself. And if you ask me which lesson changed my life more, the answer is easy. The second one. Every single time.